Have you ever cared deeply for someone who seemed to run from love the moment it became real, thoughtful, someone who instinctively built emotional walls instead of inviting you in? Someone whose silence spoke louder than their words, even while their heart quietly craved closeness? Often, the people who appear the most emotionally distant are carrying the deepest feelings. Sighs. They simply never learned how to express them. But when authentic love finally reaches an avoidant, something remarkable begins to happen. For an avoidant, real love doesn't just create a relationship. It begins an inner transformation that quietly challenges the emotional defenses they have relied on for years. Throughout much of their life, control has been their greatest source of security. They try to manage their emotions, their surroundings, and especially their relationships, because control feels predictable in a world that may have once felt emotionally unsafe. Many learned early that vulnerability could lead to disappointment, rejection, or emotional pain. As a result, they became fiercely independent, convincing themselves that needing no one was the safest path. Then, genuine love enters their life, and suddenly that carefully constructed system begins to crack. They experience emotions that cannot be controlled, explained away, or pushed aside. Feelings arrive with a depth they never expected, forcing them to confront parts of themselves they have spent years avoiding. Real love doesn't pressure an avoidant to change overnight. Instead, it gently places them in situations where control is no longer enough. They may feel overwhelmed by unfamiliar emotions, longing, tenderness, fear of losing someone, and a powerful desire for closeness that conflicts with their instinct to pull away. That inner struggle is often the first sign that something meaningful is happening beneath the surface. As they slowly loosen their grip on control, they begin to recognize an uncomfortable truth. Constant self-protection has kept them emotionally isolated, while vulnerability, despite how frightening it feels, offers a level of connection and peace they have never experienced through distance alone. This transformation is rarely dramatic. More often, it appears through quiet, almost unnoticed changes. Their voice becomes softer. They reveal something personal they would have kept hidden before. They apologize instead of disappearing. They stay present during difficult conversations instead of shutting down. These moments may seem small to others, but for an avoidant, they represent enormous emotional milestones. Every one of them is a choice to value honesty over self-protection. Little by little, love teaches them a lesson their mind resisted for years. Openness is not weakness, and being truly seen does not always end in heartbreak. They begin to realize that meaningful relationships require uncertainty. Love cannot flourish where complete emotional control exists. During this process, they often feel caught between who they have always been and who they are slowly becoming. One day, they may pull away, and the next they return, quietly testing whether the connection can survive their fears. Even during those moments of distance, something inside them has already shifted. They recognize that what once felt threatening now carries real meaning. Instead of seeing love as something that removes their freedom, they begin to understand it as a safe place where they can finally be themselves. Their fear of intimacy doesn't disappear overnight. Rather, their desire to protect the relationship gradually becomes stronger than their desire to protect themselves from every possible emotional risk. This growing willingness to embrace vulnerability is one of the strongest signs that an avoidant's feelings are genuine. They begin replacing emotional distance with presence, control with trust, and silence with honest communication. You may notice them admitting when they're wrong, asking for reassurance, expressing affection more naturally, or making a greater effort to stay emotionally available. These are significant changes because they reflect a person who is learning to remain inside love instead of escaping from it. In these moments, their motivation is no longer centered on avoiding pain. It becomes centered on preserving a relationship that feels deeply valuable and impossible to replace. Every small step away from control is a step toward authentic intimacy. When an avoidant relaxes their defenses, even slightly, it reveals how deeply they value the bond they have formed. They are entering the very place they once feared most, true emotional vulnerability, and discovering that it doesn't break them. Instead, it begins to heal them. This isn't weakness, it is extraordinary courage. For someone whose entire emotional survival has depended on staying in control, opening their heart to another person is one of the clearest expressions of genuine love. Another powerful sign appears in the way they respond to emotional closeness. Traditionally, avoidants deal with overwhelming emotions by creating distance. When feelings intensify, they often withdraw, become quiet, or disappear for a while because solitude feels safer than emotional exposure. This reaction is not rooted in a lack of love. It grows from a deep fear of becoming overwhelmed, rejected, or losing themselves within the relationship. For most avoidants, emotional withdrawal has always been their way of protecting themselves. Creating distance felt safer than remaining in moments of emotional intensity. But when genuine love enters their life, it slowly begins to challenge that lifelong survival strategy. Instead of automatically running from closeness, they find themselves trying to stay present, even when every instinct tells them to leave. This pattern is deeply rooted in their attachment history. Many avoidants learned early that showing emotions led to criticism, rejection, disappointment, or abandonment. Over time, they convinced themselves that relying only on themselves was the safest way to live. Then someone comes along who offers kindness without pressure, acceptance without judgment, and closeness without trying to control them. That experience quietly begins to reshape everything they once believed. Feeling emotionally safe doesn't happen overnight. The change is slow, delicate, and often difficult to recognize from the outside, yet it is one of the strongest signs that an avoidant is beginning to love in a healthy and genuine way. Instead of disappearing during conflict or emotionally charged conversations, they begin to stay. Rather than shutting down or pretending nothing matters, they make an effort to listen, understand, and remain engaged. This may seem ordinary to others, but for an avoidant, it represents an enormous emotional victory. Staying present means facing everything they once feared: rejection, losing control, and exposing parts of themselves they spent years hiding. Even when they struggle to find the right words, their actions begin to reveal what they cannot yet express. They stay in the conversation. They try to understand your feelings. They choose connection over escape. Those choices speak louder than perfect communication ever could. As authentic love grows, emotional presence becomes more than simply being physically available. It becomes a willingness to let someone see what lies beneath the carefully controlled exterior. They begin sharing pieces of themselves that once remained hidden. They may admit they're stressed, confused, overwhelmed, or uncertain about their own emotions. While these conversations might seem small, they represent tremendous trust. They no longer feel the constant need to protect themselves through silence or emotional distance. The more they remain engaged instead of retreating, the more they discover that emotional closeness does not erase their identity. Instead, it allows them to be fully known while still feeling accepted. Another subtle change appears in the way they handle difficult moments. Where they once needed days or even weeks to recover after conflict, they now return much sooner. Sometimes they don't leave at all. Their nervous system, once conditioned to escape emotional discomfort, slowly learns that safety can also be found through healthy connection. They still experience fear, but love begins teaching them that understanding another person can calm those fears far better than isolation ever could. Over time, this emotional presence extends beyond serious conversations. It starts appearing in everyday life. They become more affectionate in quiet ways, laugh more freely, enjoy comfortable silence together, and pay closer attention to your emotional state. They notice when something feels different. They ask how your day went. They offer reassurance when you need it. Their empathy becomes more visible, even if it remains gentle and understated. Every moment they choose to stay, instead of withdraw, strengthens both the relationship and their own emotional healing. Each decision to remain connected weakens the old beliefs that once convinced them intimacy was dangerous. When an avoidant consistently stays emotionally present instead of disappearing, it becomes one of the clearest expressions of genuine love. It shows they are learning to experience emotions without fearing them, creating room for both your feelings and their own. It reflects an inner transformation where love gradually becomes stronger than fear, and connection finally begins to feel safer than solitude. Another equally powerful shift appears in their relationship with personal space. Avoidants have always viewed distance as a form of protection. Solitude gave them control, independence, and emotional stability in situations that once felt overwhelming. Depending on someone else often seemed risky because it threatened the self-sufficiency they worked so hard to build. But authentic love slowly rewrites that pattern. When an avoidant starts choosing connection over distance, it signals that something significant is changing inside them. Early in relationships, they often feel an intense need for space after moments of emotional closeness because intimacy can overload their nervous system. Yet as trust grows, they begin experiencing that closeness differently. Instead of feeling trapped, they start feeling understood. Instead of seeing intimacy as a threat, they begin recognizing it as comfort. This realization develops gradually through repeated experiences of being accepted without pressure or controlled expectations. Little by little, they discover that sharing emotional space with someone doesn't require sacrificing their independence. As this understanding grows, their urge to pull away becomes weaker, replaced by a genuine desire to remain connected. These changes usually appear in quiet ways. Someone who once disappeared for days after meaningful conversations may now reach out first. They send a message simply to check in. They ask how you're doing without any specific reason. They choose to spend time together because they genuinely want your company, rather than feeling obligated to do so. Although these actions may seem ordinary, they represent major emotional progress. Every step toward closeness instead of distance challenges years of deeply rooted conditioning. Their heart slowly begins trusting something their mind resisted for years. That intimacy can be safe, comforting, and deeply healing. For an avoidant, seeking connection means they are no longer depending on emotional distance to regulate themselves. In the past, separation helped calm their anxiety and restore a sense of control. But authentic love introduces a completely different experience. They begin associating your presence with peace rather than pressure. Your company becomes a source of emotional stability instead of emotional overload. At first, this change can feel confusing even to them. They notice that their usual craving for isolation is fading, replaced by an unfamiliar desire to be close. For perhaps the first time, they quietly admit to themselves that they miss you when you're apart, that your presence brings comfort, and that being with you feels surprisingly safe instead of threatening. As this transformation continues, the avoidant begins to experience something that once felt impossible. They start depending on emotional connection. While that can be frightening for someone who has spent years relying only on themselves, it also becomes one of the clearest signs that their feelings are real. They no longer long only for your presence. They begin craving your understanding, your warmth, your reassurance, and the emotional comfort they once believed they didn't need. With time, this desire changes the way they approach love. Instead of instinctively pulling away when emotions become overwhelming, they slowly learn to move closer. Rather than burying their needs, they begin expressing them. They may never become overly expressive, but their actions reveal what their words still struggle to say. A thoughtful message where silence once existed, an unexpected visit instead of another excuse, a reassuring touch where distance used to take over. These quiet gestures speak volumes because they represent love becoming stronger than fear. When an avoidant starts choosing connection instead of separation, it reflects the depth of what they feel. The emotional walls that once protected them begin to soften. Closeness is no longer viewed as something that threatens their freedom. Instead, it becomes a place where they can finally relax and be accepted for who they truly are. The moment they begin seeking emotional closeness instead of isolation is often the moment authentic love takes root. Fear gradually loses its grip, and connection becomes the place where they feel safest. Another unmistakable sign of genuine love appears in their consistency. Avoidants are often known for being unpredictable in relationships. They may seem deeply invested one day and emotionally unavailable the next. This inconsistency rarely comes from a lack of feelings. More often, it reflects the constant battle between wanting intimacy and fearing it at the same time. Love attracts them while simultaneously activating the very fears they've spent years trying to avoid. But when love becomes secure and genuine, something inside them settles. They become less controlled by fear, and their behavior slowly begins matching what they truly feel. Instead of acting from anxiety or self-protection, They begin showing up because they genuinely want to nurture the relationship. Authentic love has a grounding effect on an avoidant. At first, they may resist that stability because reliability feels unfamiliar. Yet as trust grows, they realize that consistency isn't a trap, it is safety. Once they feel emotionally secure, their actions naturally become more dependable. You begin noticing the difference in everyday moments. They reply when they said they would. They arrive when they promised. They follow through on plans that they once might have avoided. These aren't signs of perfection. They're signs that love has given them something stronger than fear, a meaningful reason to stay engaged. Their emotional world, once dominated by avoidance, gradually becomes more balanced. Consistency turns into the language through which they communicate love. Grand emotional speeches may still feel uncomfortable, but steady effort becomes their way of saying, "You matter." They express their commitment through reliable communication, thoughtful actions, and by remaining emotionally available even during difficult times. Instead of viewing relationships as something to escape when things become uncomfortable, they begin seeing challenges as opportunities to grow closer. They discover that lasting love isn't built on constant excitement. It's built on trust, patience, stability, and choosing each other repeatedly. This change demands tremendous courage. It forces them to confront insecurities, self-doubt, and fears they have carried for years. Yet genuine love motivates them to become a healthier version of themselves. They begin paying attention to how their choices affect you. They think about your emotions before acting. Where self-protection once guided every decision, consideration now takes its place. Each dependable action becomes a quiet declaration of love. Every promise they keep, every difficult conversation they stay for, and every moment they choose connection over avoidance reflects their growing emotional maturity. They slowly realize that healthy relationships are not built on control or escape, but on reliability, trust, and growing together. You may also notice that they stop using distance as a shield whenever conflict arises. Rather than disappearing for days, they make genuine attempts to resolve problems. When they make mistakes, they acknowledge them instead of becoming defensive. They may even apologize in ways they never could before. This demonstrates that protecting the relationship has become more important than protecting their pride. Love teaches them accountability. It shows them that trust grows through consistent actions, and that stability creates emotional security. Over time, the unpredictability that once defined them begins to fade, replaced by a quieter, steadier form of devotion. Eventually, consistency becomes their natural emotional language. They come to understand that love isn't measured by dramatic displays or overwhelming passion, but by being dependable day after day. Fear may still appear from time to time, but it no longer controls their choices. Instead, they respond with care, presence, and respect. The person who once ran from intimacy now creates it through reliability, proving their love in countless small moments that quietly say, "I'm here and I'm staying." Perhaps the deepest transformation of all comes when an avoidant becomes willing to let themselves be fully seen. For someone who has spent years hiding behind emotional defenses, allowing another person to witness their true self is one of the greatest acts of trust they can offer. Avoidants often spend years hiding the parts of themselves they believe are too vulnerable to reveal. They conceal their emotions, silence their fears, and keep even pieces of their identity locked away behind a carefully maintained image of independence and self-control. To them, allowing someone to truly see who they are feels risky because past experiences may have taught them that openness leads to rejection, criticism, or emotional pain. Protecting themselves became more than a habit, it became a way of surviving. Over time, those defenses grew into emotional walls designed to keep others at a safe distance. But when authentic love enters their life, those walls are no longer as strong as they once were. Slowly, the desire to build a genuine connection begins to outweigh the instinct to hide. Bit by bit, they start allowing someone into the private places of their heart. This transformation doesn't happen overnight. At first, their vulnerability appears in brief, almost unnoticed moments. It may be the way they lower their guard after a disagreement, share a painful memory from their past, or allow emotions to surface that they would normally keep hidden. To someone else, these moments might seem ordinary. For an avoidant, they represent enormous emotional breakthroughs. They are signs that love is beginning to overcome fear. Gradually, they realize that if they truly want to experience love, they must allow themselves to be genuinely known, not the composed version they present to the world, but the person beneath all the emotional defenses. Genuine love gives them the courage to take that risk. Allowing themselves to be seen means opening doors they once kept firmly closed. They begin sharing insecurities they never spoke about before. They admit their doubts, their fear of not being enough, and the experiences that shape the way they relate to others. They may finally talk about childhood wounds or painful relationships that taught them to keep people at a distance. This openness isn't a request for sympathy. It's an expression of trust. It means they believe you are safe enough to witness the parts of themselves they once worked so hard to protect. Quietly, they begin believing that their honesty will be met with understanding instead of judgment. Every act of transparency, no matter how small, signals that the emotional walls built over many years are slowly giving way under the warmth of genuine affection. Their growing vulnerability also becomes visible through their actions. Someone who once avoided emotional conversations may now choose to begin them. Someone who hid behind humor, logic, or distraction may finally sit with uncomfortable feelings instead of escaping them. They admit when they're hurt. They acknowledge jealousy, fear, disappointment, or the anxiety of losing someone they deeply care about. These are emotions they may have spent years denying, even to themselves. None of this comes easily. Every honest conversation requires courage because each one takes them into unfamiliar emotional territory. Yet love gives them a reason to stay there. By revealing their weaknesses instead of hiding them, they are inviting someone into their inner world and trusting that their vulnerability will be treated with care. Few things reveal genuine love more clearly than that level of trust. Being truly seen also means they stop trying to appear unaffected all the time. The carefully maintained image of complete control begins to fade. You start seeing the full range of who they are, their laughter, tenderness, uncertainty, frustration, and genuine affection. They no longer feel compelled to perform strength or emotional distance. Instead, they begin showing up as their authentic self. For someone who has spent years protecting themselves behind emotional barriers, this honesty is incredibly freeing. It means they are choosing authenticity over self-protection. Love teaches them that they no longer need to pretend to be stronger, colder, or more independent than they truly feel. Of course, this doesn't mean they suddenly become completely open or emotionally expressive overnight. There will still be moments when fear resurfaces. They may still need space or struggle to explain what they're experiencing, but something important has changed. Instead of disappearing completely, they come back. They return to continue the conversation, repair misunderstandings, and reconnect. That willingness to return says more than perfect communication ever could. It shows they care too deeply to remain hidden forever. They've begun understanding that love cannot thrive behind emotional walls. It grows through honesty, vulnerability, and allowing another person to truly know them. When an avoidant finally lets you see their fears, their hopes, their imperfections, and their gentle side, they are offering one of the greatest gifts they can give. It is far more than vulnerability. It is authentic love choosing to reveal itself, even while fear still lingers. In the end, the transformation of an avoidant in love is rarely dramatic. It unfolds quietly, one small step at a time. Their walls don't collapse overnight. They soften through patience, trust, and repeated experiences of feeling emotionally safe. Love teaches them lessons fear never could, that vulnerability is not weakness, that closeness does not erase freedom, and that being deeply known does not always end in pain. You'll recognize this change not through grand declarations, but through consistent actions. They stay when they once would have left. They speak when silence used to feel easier. They choose understanding instead of control. Their love is reflected in their effort, their reliability, their emotional presence, and their growing willingness to let you see who they really are. When an avoidant chooses connection over distance, when they risk opening a heart that has spent years protecting itself, they reveal the deepest form of love they know. It is a love that isn't simply experienced. It is a love they consciously choose, nurture, and courageously fight for every single day.